My name is Marissa Hale. I'm 40 years old. I was 29 when my mother had her stroke. One moment I was replying to a work email. The next, I was in a hospital hallway staring at a neurologist's lips moving while my mind tried to outrun his words. He said she would likely recover, but it would take months of aggressive rehab, medications, and careful monitoring. On the surface, that sounded like hope, but all I heard was time and money, two things we had never had in abundance. While I was on the phone with rehab facilities arguing with insurance companies about what qualified as medically necessary, my brother was already making plans. He showed up to the first family meeting at the hospital in a crisp shirt and that calm, managerial tone he used with clients. "Someone needs to handle her finances," he said, folding his hands on the little round table in the family room. "You're already overwhelmed with her medical stuff. Let me take care of everything else. I'll be power of attorney, keep the bills paid, deal with the bank. You can focus on mom." I should have seen the red flags. The way he slid the phrase power of attorney in like it was as harmless as ordering coffee. The way he'd already printed forms, already highlighted sections, already talked to a colleague who specializes in this. But I was exhausted, terrified, and grateful that someone else was willing to shoulder part of the load. After that, he transformed himself into the perfect son. He visited every day with fresh flowers, joking with the nurses, charming the therapists, patting mom's hand, and talking a little too loudly about how he'd make sure she never had to worry about anything ever again. Meanwhile, I lived in a world of plastic chairs, vending machine dinners, and spreadsheets of therapy schedules. I slept with my phone on my chest, waiting for calls from specialists. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Mom had always been sharp with money. She balanced her checkbook to the penny and could tell you, without looking, how much was in every account. Seeing her struggle to remember simple words, watching her fight to lift a fork, broke something inside me. But even then, I never questioned her financial safety. Her house was paid off. Her accounts were stable. My brother was handling everything. 3 weeks after the stroke, my phone rang while I was standing in the rehab parking lot. "Marisa?" Her voice was thin and shaking. "They're saying I don't own my house anymore." My stomach dropped. "What? Who's saying that, Mom?" "The bank called," she sobbed, "asking about utilities for the new owners. New owners. I don't understand what's happening. I don't remember selling anything." For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of her crying. Mom had owned that house for 37 years. Dad built it himself before he died, every board and nail soaked in sweat and memory. It was worth around $340,000. It was the only real security she had left. "I'm going to take care of it," I said, more sure than I felt. "Don't worry about anything. I'll call you back." I drove straight to the county records office, hands so tight on the steering wheel, my knuckles turned white. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed, and the clerk slid a property search form toward me with the bored efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. The deed transfer was dated 2 weeks earlier. My mother's signature was right there at the bottom, perfectly curved and steady. For a moment, relief flickered in my chest. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe she had just forgotten. Then I remembered watching her sign a greeting card after the stroke, letters wobbling and breaking, the pen slipping in her hand. This signature was flawless, identical to the way she'd signed checks before her brain bled. Too perfect. By the time I reached my brother's office, my heartbeat felt like a drum in my throat. He looked up from his computer, more annoyed than surprised to see me. "Did you sell Mom's house?" I asked, skipping any pretense of small talk. He leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. "Mom asked me to," he said smoothly. "She can't maintain it anymore. The stairs are dangerous, the upkeep is too much. We sold it well, and the money is going into a specialized care fund for her long-term needs. It's the responsible thing to do." "What care fund?" I demanded. "Where's the money? Show me the account." He exhaled through his nose like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum. "It's complicated legal trust stuff. You wouldn't understand the tax implications. I talked to professionals. Everything is structured properly." That tone, condescending, patient, weaponized, was painfully familiar. Growing up, he'd treated me like the emotional one, the one who didn't understand big financial concepts. It worked on me when I was 15. It didn't work now. That night, I opened my laptop and started digging. The house had been sold to a company called Riverside Holdings, LLC, for $180,000, barely half its actual value. When I traced the company registration, it led straight to my brother's business partner, the same man he'd complained about for months being in over his head with debt. They had stolen $160,000 from our mother on paper, and probably more in reality. But forgery cases were notoriously expensive and slow. Mom was getting weaker. Her speech was improving, but every syllable cost her effort. We didn't have the luxury of a drawn-out legal war. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the glowing laptop screen, feeling completely outmatched. Then a memory surfaced. My brother in high school, bragging in the kitchen about how he'd cheated on an exam without getting caught. He'd actually confessed just to show off his method. His biggest weakness had always been his ego. He couldn't resist showing off when he thought he was the smartest person in the room. I called him the next day, letting my voice tremble just enough. "I'm worried about Mom's finances," I said. "Can we meet? I need to understand what you did with the house sale. I feel so lost." He loved being the expert. He loved being the one with the answers. "We'll talk," he said. "Dinner tonight. My usual place." We met at his favorite steakhouse downtown, the kind of place with dim lighting and waiters who pulled your chair out for you. I wore a jacket with deep pockets and made sure my phone's recording app was open before I walked in. I slipped it into my pocket, microphone facing out, and hoped the background noise wouldn't drown us out. "You have to understand," I began, dabbing my eyes with a napkin I didn't really need. "I'm not trying to cause problems. I just want to make sure Mom is taken care of. I trust your judgment. I always have." He relaxed instantly, shoulders dropping, a hint of a smug smile at the corner of his mouth. "Don't worry," he said, slicing into his steak. "I handled everything perfectly. Mom is going to be fine. Some people are just asking questions. The neighbors saw people measuring the house, that's all." He lowered his voice and leaned in, the way men do when they're about to share a secret they're proud of. "That's the beauty of it," he said. "Nobody questions a family transaction." I had the documents drawn up properly. I practiced her signature for weeks until it was perfect. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Practiced her signature?" I repeated, forcing my voice to stay small and curious. "Mom's been signing the same way for 40 years, he said, shrugging. "Wasn't hard to copy after I studied her old checks and documents. The notary didn't even look twice. Just stamped and witnessed like they always do." I wanted to reach across the table and shake him, scream at him, throw my water in his face. Instead, I kept my fingers wrapped around my glass and let him talk. "What about Mom?" I asked. "What if she remembers agreeing to this when her memory gets better?" He laughed. Actually laughed. "She won't remember. The stroke messed with her memory permanently. Doctor said so himself, and even if she remembers pieces, who's going to believe a sick old woman over properly filed legal documentation?" He took another bite of steak, completely at ease. "By the time anyone questions anything, the money will be long gone through the business accounts. I've already started moving it offshore. We'll have her in assisted living by then. Nothing fancy, but adequate care. Shared rooms. The state will pick up the rest once her assets are redistributed. Better than letting the house sit empty while she rots in some overpriced private place." I excused myself to the bathroom, my legs shaking. In the stall, I backed up the recording to 3 different cloud accounts with trembling fingers. If he somehow got hold of my phone, I wasn't going to lose the only proof I had. When I came back, he had spread a neat stack of documents across the table like a general planning a campaign. "Actually, there's one more thing I need from you," he said. "Some paperwork about Mom's ongoing care. Nothing major, medical authorization stuff, so we can make unified decisions. Judges like to see that the family is on the same page." He slid a thick folder toward me with his lawyer's letterhead at the top. I recognized the name. Expensive, aggressive, the kind of attorney you hired when you were more worried about winning than being right. "What kind of authorization?" I asked, flipping through the pages. "Standard things," he said lightly. "Power of attorney extensions, medical directives. It just formalizes what we're already doing. You sign, we show we agree, and it keeps outsiders from meddling." Buried in the dense blocks of legal language was a clause that made my stomach turn. It gave him complete control over every remaining asset in Mom's name, her $200,000 life insurance policy, her pension payments, anything she would receive in the future. "This gives you power over everything she owns," I said quietly. He didn't bother to hide the impatience in his eyes this time. "Someone has to make the hard decisions," he said. "Mom is not capable of managing complex financial matters anymore." The doctors confirmed significant cognitive impairment. "I haven't seen any report that says that," I replied. "You haven't been paying attention to the medical details," he snapped. "You get too emotional. I've been handling the consultations with her neurologist. That was a lie. I'd been at every major appointment, taking notes until my wrist cramped. Mom's cognitive tests showed improvement, not decline. He was rewriting reality to justify what he wanted. I need time to think about this, I said, closing the folder. His mask slipped completely for a second, eyes cold. Don't take too long. Mom's condition could deteriorate quickly. We need to act fast to protect what's left. And if you're not going to be helpful, I can handle everything myself. The threat was clear. Sign or be cut out of the process entirely. I left the restaurant with my jacket heavy against my side, my phone still recording his arrogance. I walked into the cool night air, knowing two things with absolute clarity. I had enough evidence to destroy him, and for the first time in my life, I was not going to let my brother get away with what he'd done to our mother. The recording from the steakhouse burned a hole in my pocket the entire drive home. I didn't play it again that night. I couldn't. Hearing him brag about forging our mother's signature, about planning to dump her in a state-run facility, about moving her money offshore as casually as discussing weekend plans, it had already seared itself into my mind. But I knew I couldn't rely only on a recording, no matter how damning it sounded. I needed a foundation. Dates, documents, witnesses, something that could hold up even if he tried to twist the truth the way he always did. The next morning, I began my own sort of investigation. Not the dramatic movie kind with trench coats and cigarette smoke, but the quiet, methodical kind done by a daughter who refuses to let her mother be erased. I started with the notary listed on the deed. Her office was a tiny, sunlit space near the courthouse, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and lavender cleaning spray. She greeted me warmly, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes. "Oh, yes, I remember that transaction," she said after I mentioned the date. "Lovely man, so devoted to his mother." Poor woman looked a little disoriented, but he said she'd had a minor medical procedure and was still groggy from medication. He explained everything to her so carefully. My heart sank. Was she able to communicate clearly? The notary hesitated. She nodded when I asked if she understood. Didn't speak much, looked tired, but he said she was usually more talkative. She looked almost embarrassed, as if she sensed she'd been used. And she had. He'd brought Mom there, knowing she couldn't meaningfully consent, knowing she'd seemed confused enough to pass as compliant, and he'd weaponized that confusion. I checked Mom's medical records from that day. She'd been heavily sedated for a cardiac procedure the same morning the notary said she signed the deed. There was no world in which she could legally consent to anything. Not driving, not making medical decisions, and certainly not selling the home she'd lived in for nearly 4 decades. The deeper I dug, the darker things became. I reviewed months of transactions from her checking account. My brother had been siphoning money long before the stroke. Small amounts, $200 here, $500 there, each disguised with forged receipts for home repairs, mobility equipment, cleaning services. It added up to nearly $30,000, all stolen, all before she even collapsed. By the time I closed my laptop, I knew I needed a lawyer. Not a general attorney, but someone who specialized in elder abuse and financial fraud. That's how I found Catherine Williams. Her office was neat but unpretentious, filled with framed certificates and a single orchid that leaned toward the light like it was eavesdropping. She listened to the recording twice, hands steepled, expression turning sharper each minute. When it ended, she sat back. This is one of the clearest cases I've ever seen. It's not just forgery, it's deliberate exploitation of a medically vulnerable person. With this evidence, we can push for a reversal of the sale, emergency account freezes, and criminal charges. I felt my throat tighten. How long will this take? Mom's health? Not months, she said. Weeks. That afternoon, she filed emergency motions to freeze every account connected to the sale, including those in my brother's business. She submitted the recording, medical records, and notary statements to the district attorney's office. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like oxygen fill my lungs. The next morning, at 6 a.m., my phone exploded with my brother's name. I didn't want to answer, but part of me knew I needed to hear how desperate he'd become. "You betrayed your own family," he screamed before I could say hello. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I protected our mother," I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. "You've destroyed everything," he roared. "My business, my reputation, everything is falling apart. This will ruin me financially." "Good," I said. Silence. Then, venom. "She's going to die anyway, At least this way the money stayed in the family instead of being wasted on some corporate care facility. I ended the call and sent the recording to Catherine. Evidence of intent, evidence of cruelty, evidence of everything. The emergency hearing took place the following Thursday. Mom insisted on attending, even though she needed a wheelchair, oxygen tubing draped across her chest like fragile thread. She squeezed my hand as we entered the courtroom. My brother arrived with an entire legal platoon, 3 attorneys in designer suits who looked like they billed by the breath. Their strategy was immediately clear: discredit me, paint me as unstable, claim I was trying to gain control of Mom's assets for myself. Your Honor, the lead attorney said smoothly, the plaintiff has a history of financial instability and emotional volatility. She has been pressuring her family for monetary support. This is a calculated attempt to seize valuable assets by manipulating a vulnerable woman recovering from a medical event. My blood boiled. They had clearly dug into my personal history, old debts, years of struggling after Dad died, every vulnerable moment I'd ever lived through. Then Catherine stood. Your Honor, before we continue, I believe it's appropriate to play a short recording for the court. The room went still. Even the air seemed to pause. When my brother's voice filled the courtroom, boasting about practicing Mom's signature, forging documents, planning to move her offshore, calling her a sick old woman no one would believe, the shift in the room was palpable. His attorneys cringed. One dropped his pen. By the time the recording ended, the judge's expression was carved from stone. Within minutes, the deed sale was declared void. All funds were ordered frozen and returned. My brother was ordered to pay all legal fees, and the court referred the case for immediate criminal prosecution. That afternoon, federal agents raided his office. They found forged documents, evidence of offshore transfers, communications with his business partner, detailing the scheme, and, worst of all, a trail showing he'd done this to other elderly clients. What he'd done to Mom wasn't an isolated act of opportunism. It was part of a larger pattern of predatory fraud. At his criminal trial, he sat pale and sweating while prosecutors laid out his crimes: elder abuse, wire fraud, money laundering, forgery, exploitation. His defense team tried to paint him as desperate, overwhelmed by Mom's illness, making unwise decisions out of fear. But they couldn't outrun his own recorded words. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. He received 8 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay restitution. His licenses were revoked. His business partner flipped on him for a reduced sentence. Mom recovered enough to return home 6 months later. Her home, the one Dad built. She sat in her garden one afternoon, blanket over her knees, and whispered, "I can't believe my own son did this to me." "I know," I said. "Your father would be proud of you," she told me, "and ashamed of him." A year later, Mom made a decision that surprised even me. She wanted to donate the house to a nonprofit stroke foundation. They agreed to let her live there for the rest of her life, then convert it into a recovery center. "Something good should come from all this," she said. "Your father built this house with love. Let it help people." The foundation began planning renovations before winter. Mom's home, the one nearly stolen, was becoming something larger, something healing. And I had no idea then that this was only the beginning. The nonprofit began renovations on the house in early spring, transforming Dad's old workshop into a therapy room and widening hallways to make them wheelchair accessible. Mom watched the process from her favorite chair by the window, sometimes smiling, sometimes distant. I thought the worst was behind us. I thought my brother's sentencing was the final chapter. I had no idea how wrong I was. It was 3 months after the trial when the phone rang one morning with a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Detective Morrison from the Economic Crimes Unit. Her tone was steady, professional, too professional. "Are you the daughter who exposed the financial fraud involving elderly victims?" she asked. My stomach tightened. "Yes." "Your brother's case opened a much larger investigation," she said. "We've identified additional victims that match his methods. We need your help." I didn't understand at first. "Additional victims? You mean other clients?" "No," she said. "Other families. Your recording wasn't just evidence. It was the key that unlocked a pattern. Your brother didn't work alone. This was part of a coordinated network operating across multiple states." The words rang in my ears. A network, a coordinated one. She asked me to testify before a federal grand jury to describe in detail everything I knew: the forged documents, the recorded confession, the behavioral patterns. I agreed, if only because I couldn't bear the thought of more elderly people going through what Mom had. The federal building was sterile and impossibly cold, the kind of place that stripped emotions down to facts. I sat under fluorescent lights and retold the same story I had already told to lawyers and judges and detectives. But this time, something was different. The prosecutors weren't just listening, they were connecting dots. Your brother targeted elderly individuals specifically after medical events, one prosecutor said. He looked for cognitive vulnerability, absence of close supervision, and predictable emotional responses. That is consistent with at least 12 other cases under investigation. I felt sick. He hadn't stumbled into crime. He'd studied it, practiced it, refined it. 6 months later, Detective Morrison called again. "We need to meet," she said. "There's more." I drove to the precinct expecting financial details, maybe new charges. Instead, she slid a thin folder across the table. My brother's name was on the tab. Inside were printouts, emails, research notes, flagged phrases. At first, none of it made sense. Then one sentence caught my eye like a punch to the ribs. Procedures to obtain death certificates without a body. I felt the breath leave my lungs. What? What is this? This, she said quietly, is evidence that your brother was planning to fake your mother's death. The room spun. He was corresponding with an individual who specializes in false documentation, death certificates, cremation records, insurance fraud. I stared at the papers, unable to process them. He was planning to kill her? "We're not prepared to make that legal conclusion yet," she said carefully, "but he intended for her to disappear in a state facility. If no one questioned her passing, he could collect the insurance payout." I covered my mouth with my hands. My brother had always been reckless, entitled, arrogant. But this... He did this before, she added. 2 elderly clients he claimed died in care homes. Their cases are being reopened. I couldn't speak. The betrayal, already deep, suddenly became bottomless. When I told Mom, she sat silently for a long time, staring into the middle distance. Her lips trembled. "He was going to kill me," she whispered. The words were so small, so fragile. "Yes, Mom." "I gave birth to him," she said. "I raised him. I loved him for 35 years. I held her hand as she cried, not just for what almost happened, but for the son she thought she had, the son she now realized never existed. The media picked up the story when prosecutors made the connection public. But I refused every interview request. We weren't interested in reliving the nightmare on television. Still, stories circulated. Families reached out in letters, some to thank us, others because they suspected similar things happening to their own elderly parents. One letter came from a woman who said that because of the news coverage, she questioned her son's sudden interest in her finances and discovered he had forged her signature on credit documents. "You saved my life by saving your mother's," she wrote. I kept that letter folded inside my planner for years. The house-turned-recovery center opened on schedule. Mom cut the ribbon in a new floral dress the staff bought her, hands trembling slightly around the scissors. The crowd applauded as she smiled, a small but genuine smile. For the first time since the stroke, I saw her look proud of herself. The center became something beautiful. Therapists worked with residents in what used to be the living room. The kitchen became a group dining space. Dad's workshop turned into a physical therapy gym. Families came and went, grateful for a chance at recovery they couldn't afford elsewhere. Mom lived to see the 2nd anniversary of the center. She passed in her sleep soon after, in the bedroom my father had built for her. We held a small funeral, quiet and private. The center director spoke about Mom's unwavering courage, how she turned betrayal into a beacon of healing for others. 3 years after her death, I received an unexpected phone call. "This is the Victim Services Coordinator at FCI Coleman," the voice said. "It's about your brother." I froze. "He's been diagnosed with terminal cancer. He has requested to speak with you." My instinct screamed no, but the coordinator continued. "He says he has information about additional victims, details investigators never found. He'll only share if he speaks with you." I hung up without agreeing. For a week, I carried the question like a stone in my pocket. Why should I listen to him? Why give him anything he wanted? But then I thought about the families who were still fighting for justice, the ones still missing money or answers. I called back. The call was recorded. His voice was weaker than I remembered, thinner, smaller. "I know you have no reason to help me," he said, "but I kept detailed records of other victims, hidden files. The feds never found them." "Why tell me now?" I asked. A long pause. "Because I'm dying, and for the first time, I want to do something right." He gave me the location, a safety deposit box under a fake name. "What do you want in return?" I asked. Nothing. I don't deserve anything. I just don't want more people suffering because of me. I didn't answer. I let the silence be my closure. Detective Morrison was skeptical, but she followed through. The box was exactly where he said it would be. Inside were files, 14 victims, forged documents, routing numbers, photos of paperwork validations, email chains with other members of the network. His final act, strangely, was one of truth. The evidence led to new prosecutions and recovered assets for 9 families who had long lost hope. 4 months later, he died in the prison's medical facility. No funeral, no burial. His ashes disposed of by the state. It doesn't erase what he did, Detective Morrison said, but he helped people at the end. It's what Mom would have wanted, I replied. 5 years after Mom's death, the Stroke Recovery Center had helped over 200 families. They expanded again, adding new programs and building a memorial garden for victims of elder abuse. At the heart of it sat my mother's stone. She turned betrayal into healing and pain into purpose. Standing there, watching the flowers move with the wind, I realized something I hadn't been able to name before. Even the darkest acts my brother committed had become fuel for a legacy that protected others. It didn't forgive him, it didn't redeem him, but it transformed the suffering he caused into something larger, stronger, and enduring. And the world was safer for it. The story should have ended there, but it didn't. 7 years after Mom died, a federal director called with an offer that would change everything again. The call came on a quiet Thursday morning. I had just finished reviewing progress reports from the recovery center when my phone buzzed with a Washington, D.C. area code. I almost didn't answer. After everything that had happened, I'd learned to be cautious about unexpected calls. But something in me said to pick up. "Ms. Hale," the woman said, her tone warm but formal. "This is Director Reynolds from the National Elder Justice Center. We have a proposition for you." I straightened instinctively. "A proposition?" "Yes," she replied. "Your mother's case and the subsequent investigations have shaped several national reforms. We're forming a new federal task force focused on elder financial abuse, and we believe you're uniquely qualified to lead the Victim Advocacy Division." Her words felt unreal. Me? A federal role? I was just someone who had fought for her mother and refused to back down. But she kept speaking with a confidence that made it sound like this had been obvious for a long time, just not to me. "You understand both the emotional trauma and the legal complexities," she said. "You've worked with victims, detectives, prosecutors, and medical professionals. We need someone who can bridge those worlds." I looked around my kitchen, the same table where I had cried over forged deeds, sifted through receipts, and replayed my brother's confession 100 times. "What exactly would the job involve?" I asked. "Developing national protocols," she explained, "training law enforcement to recognize subtle signs of family-based fraud, creating support systems for victims and their families, establishing rapid response teams for urgent cases, and advising on elder protection legislation." It was overwhelming, beautiful, terrifying. I thought about Mom, about the house she turned into a sanctuary for others, about the garden where she used to sit, wrapped in a blanket, asking why her son had chosen greed over love. "When do I start?" I whispered. The next 3 years were some of the hardest and most meaningful of my life. I moved to D.C., trading my quiet routines for long days inside federal offices and nights spent drafting training manuals. I spoke at conferences, led seminars, sat on panels, and met families who reminded me painfully of my own. There was Patricia Williams, the elderly woman whose daughter had emptied her retirement accounts and forged her will. Unlike Mom's case, Patricia's daughter hadn't been stopped in time. The money was gone, the house was lost, and Patricia had been living in her car when social services found her. "I still love her," she told me once, voice cracking. "How do you stop loving someone who destroys you?" I didn't know, not really, but I helped her navigate the legal system, connected her with housing support, and guided her through the emotional labyrinth of betrayal. She became one of the first residents in a Virginia recovery facility we launched. 6 months later, she was volunteering at a senior center, warning others about the warning signs she'd missed. "You can't get back what you've lost," she told me once, squeezing my hand, "but you can build something new from what's left." During those years, I helped draft the Family Protection Act, a sweeping piece of legislation that strengthened penalties for family financial abuse and forced banks to flag suspicious transactions involving elderly clients. Senators quoted Mom's case during hearings. This bill would not exist without people like you, Senator Rodriguez told me after the signing. Your mother would be proud. I didn't cry in public, but I nearly did that day. 5 years after Mom's death, the Stroke Recovery Center celebrated its 5th anniversary. It had grown beyond anything we imagined. Expanded programs, a second building, and a rural outreach initiative. Families from 3 states came for the celebration. During the event, an 82-year-old resident named Mrs. Chen approached me. She held my hand like she'd known me forever. I heard about your mother, she said. She saved my life. I blinked. How? She explained that after her stroke, her son pressured her to sign documents, insisting they were for her protection. But the center had taught her warning signs, signs she recognized just in time. I confronted him, she said proudly. He backed down. He knew I wasn't alone. Her voice shook. Your mother's story gave me the courage to protect myself. I swallowed hard. She would be glad, I said. Not long after, I received a letter from a small law office. My brother's estate had been processed. There was a life insurance policy, one that had somehow slipped through the cracks during the trial. $50,000. Blood money. My first instinct was to refuse it, to burn it, to pretend it didn't exist. But then I thought of the families who still needed legal help and couldn't afford it, the ones who had no advocate, the ones who were alone. So I donated every penny to the National Elder Justice Center, specifically to establish a legal clinic for elderly fraud victims. It's poetic justice, Director Reynolds said, using his money to help the people he harmed. The clinic was named after my mother. Its first year recovered over $800,000 for families who thought they'd lost everything. One man, a widower whose grandson had forged his signature to take out a reverse mortgage, wrote to me, "Thanks to your mother's clinic, I'm back in my home. Your family's sacrifice saved mine." Today marks 11 years since I recorded my brother in that restaurant. I'm married now to a prosecutor I met during the task force work, and we have a little girl we named after my mother. When she's older, I'll tell her the truth. Not all at once, not the darkest parts, but the important things, that courage matters, that speaking up matters, that love and justice can grow from places of deep suffering. The Stroke Recovery Center has helped over 400 families now. Its model is being replicated nationwide. The legal clinic has recovered more than $3 million for elderly victims. The laws we helped shape have prevented countless crimes. My brother's final act, those hidden files, helped prosecutors catch 14 more criminals and recover nearly $2 million for unsuspecting families. None of it brings Mom back. None of it erases the betrayal. But it proves something I now believe with my entire being. Even the deepest wounds can be transformed into protection for others. Even the darkest stories can give birth to healing. Even the greatest betrayals cannot silence the power of love, justice, and truth. My brother thought he was stealing a house. Instead, he ignited a legacy that will outlast us all. A legacy my daughter will inherit. Not of money, but of purpose. Not of fear, but of courage. Not of betrayal, but of unwavering love.